Hello, my name is Aristides Armas, and I'm going to talk briefly about foreign policy, specifically about Cuban American relations. I personally object to the United States embargo against Cuba. I think the embargo is counterproductive, and I'm going to mention why. First and foremost, the United States embargo against Cuba gives the Castro regime the excuse it needs to cover up its own economic failures. What are those economic failures? Those are the economic failures of his command economy, of his communist economic policy, inefficiency, scarcity, um, widespread poverty, lower standard of living. Additionally, this system represses human rights, it represses freedom of speech, and it takes away from ordinary Cubans the capacity to choose their own destiny. Um, so many politicians and people of influence in the USA and abroad had thought about this and had argued for many different ways to create democratic change in Cuba. And they sought to implement the embargo back during the Eisenhower administration to respond to Cuba's nationalization of American property and its alignment with the Soviet Union. That was during the Cold War. It was a different time. Um, but now this policy makes no sense. Most Americans agree. You can go online and look for all the surveys that the United States embargo against Cuba is a failed policy and is a vestige of the Cold War era. Um, Yet, why is this policy still in place? I am of the opinion that this policy is still in place because of a political nexus between the Miami Cuban American elite and certain elements within the government that for political reasons objectively are fighting for the maintenance of the embargo against Cuba, and they're defending this policy. Uh, but really, this policy hasn't worked. It hasn't. Cuba has not made a transition to democracy, or it has not adopted free market economics. Um, and actually, you go to YouTube and watch videos about Cuban politics, and you can listen to Cuban politicians and members of the regime within Cuba. They always pointing out that the reason why Cuba hasn't been able to develop is because of the American embargo, and this is consistent. You can read it in the literature. You can watch many videos. You can talk to people. You can go to Cuba and talk to ordinary people, and they are familiar with this. You can travel within Cuba, and everywhere you're gonna see billboards claiming that the embargo is causing tremendous economic costs, and this is why Cuba hasn't, been able to make progress in the economic realm. So, what does lifting the embargo does? First, I'm gonna acknowledge people who defend the embargo. One of the main points is that they argue that it's not a good idea to lift the embargo because doing so will put money into the regime, that it will buttress the machine of repression um, by, giving dollars to the government of Cuba that, then will be used to maintain the regime. And that is probably the main argument. They also go back to historical forces and precedents, and they claim that American property was seized and nationalized, um, and therefore the USA should be compensated. American citizens should be compensated before the embargo should be lifted. They also say that the embargo should not be lifted if Cuba doesn't abide by or meet certain criteria, such as opening up the political system, implementing economic reform, etc. So this is the main argument. But if you consider the power of telecommunications, the internet, you consider the power of freedom to create freedom. For instance, if you open up Cuba, you lift embargo against Cuba, you will create trade. You will create the exchange of ideas, of communication. Money will flow into the country, and the regime within the country is going to struggle with that because it's going to be economic change. It's going to be a change in the attitude of the people, a change um, in their way of thinking. They're going to be able to see what's outside the little bubble island, because you have to remember Cuba is in a bubble. Like access to the internet is restricted. Um, it's difficult for ordinary Cuban citizens to understand what's out there, and to educate themselves, and to understand economics from a Western point of view, and to understand that there are all these other countries that have different systems. There's a lot of propaganda within the country, and there's a lot of you know you could say brainwashing in a way or the other. But lifting the embargo is also going to benefit American citizens and business interests that will be able to go into the markets of Cuba, be able to sell goods and services. And I am convinced, it is my personal opinion, that doing so will be great for democratization, uh, specifically because Cuba is not China. Cuba is a small island, and is very close to the United States. And the political, economic and cultural influence of the United States will definitely penetrate Cuban society profoundly, especially you leave the embargo. And this influence is going to unravel itself eventually, and Cuba will become again a free country, a democratic country. But I am of the personal opinion that doing so requires lifting the embargo. And I believe that, you know, this is one of those examples where the right policy doesn't get done, it doesn't go through because of political obstacles. I mean, in order to lift the embargo, you will need the approval of Congress. For a variety of reasons, many conservatives in Congress, specifically the Cuban American lobby, opposes this change in policy. So it becomes very political, and this is why it hasn't gotten done in so long. But I hope one day it will, and I'm sure one day it will, and I'm also sure that one day Cuba will become a democratic society once again. It will embrace uh, a free market economy, and it will embrace democracy. But I am also of the opinion, and this is a different subject altogether. I'm kind of deviating from the main focus of this video, which is Cuban American foreign policy and advocating for the lifting of the embargo. But on a side note, I'm saying that Cuba should not forget the achievements of the revolution. And by this, I am acknowledging certain achievements the revolution have made: progress in healthcare, education, social victories for the people of Cuba. Um, you had to give credit to the fact that Cuba is one of the safest countries in Latin America. You had to also give credit to the fact that organized crime and the cartels that are running rampant in Mexico and other nations are not in Cuba. Cuba is a safe place. It really is. So many people don't understand this, but there has been major achievements brought upon by the revolution. And there was a reason there was a revolution. I mean, you look at Cuba before Fidel Castro came to power, um, there was a lot of corruption within Cuba, uh, economic inequality, illiteracy, and the United States really had an overwhelming control of Cuba's economic and political fabric. And these are historical forces. You know, Castro really rallied behind the nation in the sense that he rallied behind the idea of nationalism, the idea of liberating Cuba from American imperialism. But in a way, I feel that he had to embrace communism and the Soviet Union as a way to protect himself and to protect the revolution he created it, because at the time the United States was very hostile to any progressive governments. You can look at what happened in Guatemala with Arbenz, and you can look what happened in Chile uh, when Pinochet gave the coup d'etat. And then you can realize that at this time in history, the United States sought any penetration in Latin America as a huge threat, given the context of the Cold War. Um, so in that sense, giving Cuba back to the Cubans, implementing a social safety net that provided uh, for the people, you know, basic access to education, to healthcare, uh, cleaning up the mafia, um, you know, creating a society where there's no a whole lot of drug abuse, there's no a whole lot of violence, and all these are things that I personally give credit to the Cuban Revolution. But by the same token, the oppression of human rights, um, the injustices of having a system where government bureaucrats and the government elite, you know, has all the money and the Cuban people are very poor, and the tourist apartheid that went on, and in a way still going on, where Cuban Americans going to Cuba enjoy a higher standard of living than ordinary Cubans. Tourists enjoy a higher standard of living than ordinary Cubans. They go there, they go to the best resorts, they eat at the best restaurants, and the Cuban people are suffering. You know, they're suffering because of economic deprivation. Yes, they're safe. Yes, they have access to healthcare and education. And I believe the people of Cuba are grateful for that. But they also want prosperity. They also want um, an improvement in the quality of their life and in their standard of living, specifically speaking. I mean, their ability to own cars and, you know, have a TV and a PlayStation and things of that nature. Um, so my conclusion is that aside from my personal beliefs on what the Cuban Revolution brought upon in terms of cons and pros and why the embargo is still going on, I believe that lifting the embargo is definitely an approach into democratization. It is an approach that should be embraced, and I advocate that approach. And I think many people out there I agree with me. I'm sure others disagree with me. I apologize if I made some mistakes in my syntax. English is not my first language, but I did this impromptu. I didn't read it out of a piece of paper. It just came out of my head on the spot. But I wanted to share with you guys my personal beliefs and opinions in regards to this matter. And I hope to talk to you again. And goodbye.